Welcome to the deep dive. Today, um, today we're diving into this question of why people believe the things they do. Something I think we all kind of wonder about sometimes.
Yeah, definitely.
You've given us a fascinating stack of stuff. We've got research papers, we've got personal stories, even some stuff about how stress impacts decision making.
Well, it seems like you're really interested in getting to the bottom of what makes people tick. How do we form our opinions? Why are we so resistant to change?
Right.
And maybe, just maybe, can we learn to be more persuasive ourselves? The stuff you've sent over touches on all of that.
Let's dive in. One thing that really stood out to me was this concept of confirmation bias.
Uh-huh.
I know I've definitely experienced it firsthand. Like, have you ever tried to change a loved one's mind about something, even with what you think is irrefutable evidence? It's like talking to a brick wall.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
We all fall prey to confirmation bias.
Right.
It's the sneaky little tendency we have to favor information that confirms our existing beliefs, even if that information is flawed or incomplete. Yeah.
And get this, there's research showing that this bias even affects how we interpret supposedly objective data.
Wait, really? So even if you hit someone with cold, hard facts, they might still see what they want to see.
Precisely.
Wow.
There was this fascinating study where researchers presented people on both sides of the death penalty debate
Okay.
with fabricated research findings. Both sides were given identical information, but each group interpreted the data in a way that supported their pre-existing stance.
That's wild. It's like our brains are actively filtering out information that doesn't fit our worldview. No wonder it's so hard to change someone's mind once they've made it up.
It certainly makes things challenging, and it's not just about hot-button issues like the death penalty.
Hmm.
This bias affects everything from how we consume news to the way we interact with people on social media.
Right.
It even explains why those clickbait headlines are so darn effective.
Okay, so maybe we should unpack that a little bit. How does confirmation bias play into things like our news consumption or social media feeds?
I mean, haven't we all noticed how our social media seems to just echo our own opinions back to us?
Yeah. It's not just your imagination. The algorithms that power these platforms are designed to keep us engaged. And one way they do that is by feeding us content that aligns with our past behavior. The more we click on articles or videos that confirm our existing views, the more those types of posts show up in our feeds.
Right.
It creates what's often called a filter bubble, where we're shielded from opposing viewpoints.
So in a way, we're almost training these algorithms to reinforce our own biases. It's a little unsettling to think about.
It is a bit of a double-edged sword. On the one hand, personalized content can be helpful and efficient. But on the other hand, it can lead to intellectual isolation and make us less receptive to new information or challenges to our beliefs.
So if just throwing facts at people doesn't work, what does? I noticed that the stuff you sent also dives into the power of emotion and storytelling. You know those speeches that just give you goosebumps?
Oh, yeah.
It's not always the logic or the arguments, but the way the speaker makes you feel.
What's fascinating is that this isn't just a subjective experience. Neuroscientists have actually mapped what happens in the brain when we're moved by a powerful speech or story. They found that during these moments, activity in the brain becomes synchronized across listeners, not just in areas related to language processing, but also in regions like the amygdala and insula, which are key players in emotional processing and empathy.
So it's like the speaker is actually transferring their emotional state to the listener. That's pretty mind-blowing.
It really is, and it highlights how emotions can be a potent force for influence. Think about iconic advertising campaigns like Apple's Think Different,
Yeah.
which tapped into our desire to be both unique individuals, A&D, part of something bigger.
Oh, that campaign was brilliant.
Yeah.
It makes you realize how tapping into our emotions, especially those deep-seated desires for belonging and individuality, can be incredibly persuasive.
And it's not just about selling products either. Political speeches, social movements, even everyday conversations rely on this emotional connection to resonate with an audience.
Okay, so we've got confirmation bias making us cling to our beliefs and powerful emotions swaying us in different directions. This deep dive is starting to make me wonder if we have any control over our own minds at all. Maybe I shouldn't have skipped my coffee this morning.
Well, don't worry, you haven't lost all agency. But the stuff you sent over does bring up another factor that affects our susceptibility to influence: stress.
Oh, tell me about it. I know when I'm feeling stressed, even the smallest things can set me off. It's like my brain goes into overdrive.
That's your body's natural stress response kicking in. When we perceive a threat, whether it's real or imagined, our brains release hormones like cortisol and adrenaline, which shift our focus towards potential dangers and make us more reactive.
So that explains why I can't seem to make a rational decision when I'm under pressure. Like my brain is hijacked by fear.
It's not quite a hijacking, but it's definitely a shift in priorities. Under stress, our focus narrows, we become more attuned to negative information, and our decision-making tends to become more risk-averse.
It's like that classic example of the fight or flight response, right? Our ancestors needed that instinct to survive in dangerous situations, but it doesn't always serve us well in the modern world.
Exactly. And there's research showing that the stress response even affects how we interpret information. For example, a study on firefighters found that on high-stress days, they were much more likely to focus on negative news stories than positive ones.
And that makes sense. When you're already feeling on edge, the last thing you want is more bad news. It reminds me of that story about the California Golden Bears football team. They were playing against a powerhouse opponent, and they got so caught up in trying to avoid a blowout that they missed opportunities to actually win the game.
It's a classic example of how stress can lead to risk aversion, even when a bold move might be the best strategy. Their focus on avoiding a negative outcome overshadowed their potential for success.
So we're prone to confirmation bias, swayed by emotions, and easily thrown off course by stress. Is there any hope for making clear-headed decisions, let alone influencing others?
There is hope. It's not all doom and gloom. The research actually points to a powerful antidote to stress and its influence on our decisions, a sense of control, or what psychologists call agency.
So if we feel like we're in the driver's seat, we're less likely to freak out when things get tough.
Exactly. When people feel empowered to make choices, even small ones, they're more likely to stay calm under pressure, think more clearly, and make decisions that are in their best interest. There's this great example of a hospital that was struggling to get staff to wash their hands regularly.
Oh, yeah.
Instead of issuing threats or warnings, they installed electronic boards that gave positive feedback each time someone used hand sanitizer.
It's interesting.
Simple things like, "You're doing great."
So just a bit of positive reinforcement made a difference.
Compliance shot up to almost 90%.
Wow.
It turns out our brains are much more responsive to rewards than punishments. It has to do with the way different parts of our brains are activated.
Right.
When we anticipate a reward, we see more activity in the go system, which encourages action. But when we focus on avoiding a negative outcome, the no-go system kicks in, making us hesitate and second-guess ourselves.
So it's not just about willpower, but about understanding how our brains are wired.
Precisely, and this applies to so much more than just hand washing. Think about how you might motivate a team at work.
Yeah.
Encourage healthy habits in your kids, or even persuade someone to see your point of view in an argument.
Uh-huh.
By framing things positively, emphasizing choices, and highlighting potential rewards, you can activate that go system and increase your chances of success.
So instead of just commanding people, we should empower them.
Yeah.
Give them options and a sense of ownership over the outcome.
Exactly. It's like that classic experiment with the kids and the marshmallows.
Sure.
The ones who could delay gratification and hold out for the bigger reward, they did better in life later on.
Yeah.
But what's really interesting is that some researchers now believe it wasn't just about willpower. Those kids might have had more trust that the researcher would actually come back with the extra marshmallows.
Interesting.
It highlights how important trust and credibility are when we're trying to influence others.
So maybe it's not just about logic and evidence, but also about building relationships and creating a sense of shared purpose.
You're getting it. Now, there's another element at play here that I found really fascinating: curiosity. You included that anecdote about the student who hacked into Harvard Business School's admissions website just to see if he got in early. It's like, we can't resist peeking behind the curtain, even if it drives us a little crazy.
Oh, totally. And it's not just about college admissions. Think about pregnancy tests, for example. Why would anyone pay extra for one that gives results a day earlier when you could just wait? It's like our brains are hardwired to crave information, even if we can't do anything with it immediately.
It's not just a human quirk either. There's research showing that even monkeys respond to information as a reward in itself, similar to how they react to food or water. It suggests that this drive to fill in information gaps is deeply ingrained in our evolutionary history.
So it's not just about practical knowledge. It's a primal urge. It's like me buying the more expensive pregnancy test just to know a day sooner. But how can we use this understanding of curiosity to be more influential?
If you can spark someone's curiosity, make them feel like they're getting access to exclusive information, they're much more likely to lean in and pay attention. Think about how you frame your message, the questions you ask,
Yeah.
even the way you structure a presentation.
Right.
Can you create a sense of mystery?
Hmm.
Can you hint at something intriguing that they won't want to miss?
That's clever.
Huh.
It's like turning information into a treasure hunt.
Uh,
Speaking of paying attention, another thing that struck me in the stuff you sent was the power of social learning.
right.
It seems like we're constantly picking up cues from others, often without even realizing it.
That's right. We're social creatures to the core.
Right.
One of the most classic studies in this area is Bandura's Bobo doll experiment.
Okay.
Kids who watched an adult act aggressively toward an inflatable doll were much more likely to be aggressive themselves.
Wow.
It highlights how much we learn by observing others,
Right.
especially those we perceive as role models.
It's a bit scary how easily we absorb behaviors, especially when we're young. I remember noticing this with my own child. They were way more interested in playing with my phone than any of their toys.
It's a double-edged sword, though. Social learning can lead to positive outcomes,
Uh-huh.
but it can also perpetuate negative behaviors. There's that unsettling example from your research about organ donations being refused because the previous patient declined. Even if the reasons were completely different, it shows how powerfully we're swayed by others, even when their choices aren't relevant to our own situation.
So if we're constantly looking to others for cues, does that mean the majority is always right? The stuff you sent also talks about the wisdom of the crowd, right?
The classic example is guessing the weight of an ox at a county fair. Individually, people's guesses are all over the place. But when you average all those estimates, you often get a remarkably accurate result. It suggests that aggregating diverse opinions can lead to better outcomes than relying on a single expert.
But what happens when the crowd is wrong?
That's where things get interesting.
Okay.
The research points to what's called the equality bias.
Okay.
This tendency to weigh all opinions equally, even when some are clearly more informed than others. For example, in one study, people were asked to answer tricky math questions.
Uh-huh.
Even experts got some of them wrong, but the majority vote was even less accurate.
It's a reminder that we need to be critical thinkers, even when everyone else seems to agree. So we have to be wary of social influence, navigate our own confirmation bias, and factor in our emotional state. It seems like there's so much to consider when it comes to making decisions and influencing others.
It is a complex interplay of factors.
Yeah.
But understanding those factors is the first step towards becoming more deliberate and effective in our interactions.
So how do we pull all this together? What are the key takeaways when it comes to understanding human behavior and harnessing the power of influence?
One crucial insight is that influence isn't just about delivering information.
Okay.
It's about understanding the whole person, their beliefs, their motivations,
Right.
their emotional state,
Yeah.
their social context,
Oh.
and even their biological predispositions.
So it's not just about logic and evidence, but also about empathy and connection.
Absolutely. It's about understanding where someone is coming from,
Right.
meeting them where they are, and finding ways to connect with their deepest needs and desires.
This is all fascinating, but it also raises some ethical questions. If we can influence people, sometimes without them even realizing it, how do we ensure we're using that power responsibly?
That's a crucial question, and it speaks to the broader implications of this research.
Yeah.
Understanding the mechanisms of influence is one thing, but wielding that power ethically is another challenge altogether.
I mean, think about advertising, political campaigns, even social media algorithms.
Yeah.
They're all designed to influence our behavior, sometimes in ways that aren't transparent or even in our best interest.
Exactly, and that's why it's so important to have these conversations, to be aware of the subtle forces that shape our decisions, and to use our understanding of human psychology for good rather than manipulation.
So knowledge is power,
Yeah,
but it's up to us to use that power wisely.
precisely. It's about recognizing that influence is a responsibility, not just a tool to get what we want.
Okay, so we've talked about beliefs, emotions, stress, agency, curiosity, social learning.
Right?
Is there anything else in this research that we should touch on before we wrap up?
There's one more fascinating concept that I think is worth highlighting. The idea that our brains are wired for meaning-making.
Meaning-making, what do you mean by that?
It's this innate human drive to find patterns, connect the dots, and create narratives that help us understand the world around us.
Okay.
It's how we make sense of chaos, find order in randomness, and ultimately find our place in the grand scheme of things.
So even when things seem random or confusing, our brains are searching for a story.
Exactly. And this has implications for how we process information, how
How?
we make decisions, and how we interact with others.
Can you give me an example?
Let's say you see a news report about a crime.
Okay.
Your brain automatically starts piecing together the story. Who did it?
Right.
Why they did it?
Right.
And what it means for your own safety and security.
Yeah.
You might start looking for patterns in your own life that confirm or challenge the narrative that's being presented.
Yeah.
You might even adjust your behavior based on the conclusions you draw.
So even a simple news report can trigger this meaning-making process.
Absolutely. It's happening all the time, often below the level of conscious awareness. And it's not just about news stories. It applies to everything from our personal relationships to our political beliefs to our understanding of the universe.
Like we're all constantly trying to make sense of the world, even when we don't have all the information.
Exactly. And that's why storytelling is such a powerful tool for influence. Yeah.
When we can craft a compelling narrative that resonates with people's existing beliefs and experiences,
Uh-huh.
we can tap into their innate desire to find meaning
Right.
and connect with something larger than themselves. It's how we build movements,
Uh-huh.
inspire action, and ultimately change the world.
It sounds like we could talk about this all day.
Yeah.
But I'm aware of the time, and I know our listener is eager to dive into their own meaning-making process.
You're right. It's time to hand the conversation back to our listener and let them ponder all of this for themselves.
Wow, this deep dive has really been a journey. We've covered so much ground, from the sneaky ways our brains try to confirm what they already believe, to the power of a good story, the surprising role of stress, and even how monkeys crave knowledge.
It really has been. Yeah, it's been an exploration of all the subtle and not so subtle ways we're influenced and how we, in turn, influence the world around us. It makes you realize that human behavior is a lot more complex than we often give it credit for. It's not just about logic and reason, you know? There's this whole symphony of factors at play, from our biology and emotions to our social connections and the stories we tell ourselves.
It really is a fascinating tapestry, and while we may never fully unravel all the threads, the more we understand about these patterns, the more equipped we are to navigate the world and make conscious, informed decisions.
Absolutely. So for our listener who has been absorbing all of this incredible information, what are some of the most valuable takeaways? If they could only hold on to a handful of insights from this deep dive, what would you want them to remember?
First and foremost, I'd say remember that we're all susceptible to these hidden forces of influence. We have biases we may not even be aware of,
Right?
emotions that can cloud our judgment, and a deep-seated need to find meaning, even in the most chaotic of circumstances. The key is to become aware of these tendencies, so we're not just blindly reacting to them.
It's like that old saying, know thyself. Once we understand our own internal landscape, we can start to navigate it more effectively.
Exactly. And the second thing I'd emphasize is the importance of perspective taking.
Yeah.
If we want to be influential, truly influential, it can't just be about getting people to do what we want.
Right.
It has to start with understanding where they're coming from, what matters to them, and what might be driving their beliefs and behaviors.
It's like that saying, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. If you can show genuine empathy and understanding, you're much more likely to connect with someone on a deeper level.
You've hit the nail on the head. And finally, I'd remind our listener that influence is a responsibility, not just a skill. The more we understand about human psychology, the more careful we need to be about how we use that knowledge. It's a bit like learning to wield a powerful tool.
Right.
In the wrong hands, it can cause harm. But used ethically and thoughtfully, it can be a force for positive change.
It's a sobering reminder that with great power comes great responsibility. We can't just go around manipulating people or using these insights for selfish gain. It's about using our understanding of human behavior to build bridges, foster connection, and ultimately make the world a better place.
Well said, and I think that's a perfect note to end on. As our listener goes forth into the world, armed with this newfound knowledge about themselves and others, I hope they'll remember to use it wisely, compassionately, and with a sense of purpose.
And that's a wrap on our deep dive into the fascinating world of human behavior. We hope you've enjoyed this exploration and that you're walking away with some new insights and perspectives to ponder. But before we sign off, as promised, here's a 10-point summary of the key takeaways, something for you to keep in mind as you navigate your day-to-day life.
All right, let's do it.
Number 1, confirmation bias. We all have a tendency to favor information that confirms our existing beliefs. Be mindful of this bias and actively seek out diverse viewpoints.
Number 2, emotional influence. Our emotions play a powerful role in how we process information and make decisions. Learn to recognize your own emotional triggers and how they might be influencing you.
Number 3, stress response. When we're under stress, Our brains go into fight or flight mode, making us more reactive, risk-averse, and focused on negative information. Find healthy ways to manage stress and make important decisions when you're feeling calm and centered.
Number 4, need for control. People are more likely to be persuaded and make positive choices when they feel in control. Offer choices, emphasize empowerment, and create environments where people feel safe to make their own decisions.
Number 5, the power of curiosity. Our brains are wired to crave information, even if it's not immediately useful. Tap into this natural drive by framing your message in a way that sparks curiosity and makes people want to learn more.
Number 6, social learning. We learn by observing others, especially those we admire or identify with. Be mindful of the behaviors you model and surround yourself with people who inspire you to be your best self.
Number 7, the wisdom and folly of the crowd. Aggregating diverse opinions can lead to surprisingly accurate results. But beware of the equality bias, the tendency to weigh all opinions equally, even when some are more informed than others.
Number 8, reframing for influence. Frame your message in a way that activates the go system in the brain by emphasizing potential gains, highlighting choices, and creating a sense of hope and possibility.
Number 9, the importance of meaning making. Our brains are constantly searching for patterns and creating narratives to make sense of the world. Use storytelling to connect with people on a deeper level and help them find meaning in your message.
And number 10, ethical considerations. The ability to influence is a powerful tool. Use it wisely, compassionately, and always with the intention of making a positive impact.
And remember, the journey of understanding human behavior never truly ends.
Right.
There's always more to learn, more to discover, and more to ponder as we navigate the fascinating complexities of the human experience.
So keep those brains buzzing, keep exploring, and keep diving deep. Until next time.